I absolutely think that it does. People get cues from the media, and they're socialized by the media in all kinds of ways, and one of the most common ways is they get relational cues or relational codes that they get from watching movies and film and listening to music, and I think that impacts greatly the way they behave in their own interpersonal relationships.
Absolutely. If you look at postmodern, we've used, there's only 24 pieces in the pie. So we have what's called awareness shares. So you only could be aware of so many things in a day because there's only 24 hours and you have to probably sleep 8 of them. So the other hours, the other 16, usually 8 of them are at work. So the other 8, I don't know what the average TV watching is or magazines, but if you look at a magazine, everyone looks really pretty or really handsome, or they're idealized. Even if they're older, like Mitt Romney's a handsome man. He looks the part for the president. And so what happens is people see that a couple of things. One, they see you have to be attractive. So attractiveness has become the new currency in relationships. Money too, but money and attractiveness. If you're cute, you're taken very seriously. If you're not very attractive or probably overweight, people aren't going to take you very seriously. You're kind of ignored. You're probably going to have to try to get your voice heard. Or old.
Yes. I think that it, number one, defines what that partnership looks like, that it's one person versus multiple people. It puts that relationship up. It puts that as the heightened relationship that should be most important in your life, and if you don't have that, you're a complete and total loser, and oh my God, you should just go and, you know, the spinster, the old funny uncle, like all of those kinds of negative stereotypes are what's there when there isn't that idealized romantic relationship. And it has to be just that one person. Because if it's not, and usually it's much more, I think it's kind of changed in regards to gays and lesbians. And notice I said gays and lesbians because, again, bisexuals aren't there because then that's multiple partners.
Right.
An issue with that. And so it's that kind of one person that is my soulmate and there's just one of them out there, and that it's that whole entire idea of that one person for me.
That's a bit of a tricky question. I guess on balance, I would say that it's more negative, and that's because I think Hollywood in particular creates a series of unrealistic expectations in relationships, and so I think Hollywood tells us what an ideal romantic relationship should look like, and I think in real life it's almost impossible for relationships to live up to that standard, and so I think that can often be a source of conflict because they fall short of whatever the ideal is set up by Hollywood. On the other hand, I do think that we can also learn some just basic ways of relating to people by watching the media, and so I don't think it's all bad, but I do think that in terms of interpersonal relationships, and specifically romantic interpersonal relationships, that often there's an impossible ideal created that we measure ourselves against, and we expect love to look like what we see in film, and it doesn't.
I surveyed 50 college students and asked if they thought the media influenced their definition of an ideal romantic partner. In contradiction to what the experts said, a surprising 23 of the students responded with no, while only 20 responded with yes, as shown here. According to these findings, there's a gap between what the experts say and what the students say.
Again, I think a lot of people take their cues about romantic ideals from the media. So I think even underrepresented groups are taking cues about what romantic relationships should look like from the media, even if they don't personally see themselves represented. I think the more fundamental and basic problem has to do with, for instance, the closet, which is a lot of people don't feel comfortable with their own sexuality because they don't see it represented. And so they don't have, not only don't they have models of what healthy relationships might look like, what healthy homosexual relationships might look like, they don't even have, in many cases, representations of individuals who are like themselves, and as a result, this makes the whole socialization process for them even more difficult.
I think that at times they do look up to, just because there's a penis of a vagina in that relationship doesn't necessarily mean they don't put two vaginas or two penises in
Right.
it. And so I think that they just simply move themselves into that gender role that they find more comfortable, and then put the correct kibbles and bits on that other person, and so that's how they look at those relationships. And so I think that, especially if you look at the history of film and the history of TV and the history of all of this, that GLBT folk especially are really good at reading between the lines. And so there can be straight relationships that I would actually argue are gay relationships.
But in Rome, man, same thing. They're always ready to go. They always have a good car. They get a parking place. They get a table. No one has bad breath. Their hair looks good as soon as they wake up. Not happening. And this causes women to be insecure. Men too.
I think it absolutely affects the dating world. Again, I think people are always measuring themselves against what they see in the media. I'll tell a quick story that I hope sort of illustrates this point. A few years ago, I had a graduate student, and when she graduated from college, she finished her master's degree, and when she graduated from college, she was engaged and she was getting married, and she invited me to read poetry at her wedding, and I was more than happy to do this. It was a nice invitation. But she had the most produced Hollywood wedding that I have ever attended in my life, and I think I've been to quite a few weddings. So every aspect of this wedding looked like the fairy tale. I mean, it all was scripted to look like a Disney wedding. Now, again, nothing Disney was there,
right.
but I mean, it was manufactured to be that kind of perfect. Everything, I mean, literally, everyone involved sort of got scripts that were managed down to the minute of what was supposed to happen, and I mean, just everything was planned out. And it was a beautiful ceremony, and I'm sure that on tape it looks fabulous. But one of the things that struck me as really interesting is when we got to the reception later that evening. Even though I think people really liked the bride and groom and thought that they were a great couple, but what everybody was talking about at the reception was how that wedding ceremony was completely devoid of emotion, and it's because they tried to replicate an ideal that isn't real, and that people again model their relationships after what they see in the media, and because what they see in the media is completely unrealistic, they're not able to live up to those standards. So they, in their own lives, are confronted often with disappointment, with relationships that are unsuccessful. I mean, we rarely see complex conflict dealt with in complex terms in media, not the least of which because the format of media prevents it. I mean, if you're telling a 2-hour story, right, if you have a film and it's 2 hour long, or you have a situation comedy and has to resolve in 30 minutes, there may be conflict, but the conflict is almost always resolved and tied up in this perfect package with a nice, neat little bow, and in real life it isn't like that.